So hi, my name is Audrey Wilfong, and my presentation is on climate change efficacy on the University of California Riverside campus. So to begin with an introduction. So some background is that I feel like, as we're all aware, we can expect more frequent wildfires, longer periods of drought in some regions, such as Southern California, and an increase in the number, duration, and intensity of tropical storms. In the face of climate change, the UC system, as a national leader in sustainability, has taken on a carbon neutrality initiative to directly combat climate change, such as setting a goal to become carbon neutral by 2025. This is all well and good, but climate change education is currently lacking, and a class about climate change is not required to graduate from any of the UC campuses. This is an issue because education is a critical agent in addressing the issues of climate change and allows people to make informed decisions about the actions that they must take in the face of worsening climate change. So the purpose of my research was to send out surveys to help gauge students' climate change efficacy by asking them questions about what they know and how they feel about climate change. The hope is that students' efficacy will increase after taking a class with a lesson or lessons on climate change. This higher efficacy will be necessary to produce student stewards of climate change action. So the methodology. So the climate change surveys were sent out for 4 quarters: spring 2021, summer 2021, session A and B, so at the start and at the end, and fall 2021 for a total of 4 quarters. The climate change survey part 1 was sent out during week 1 and 2 of the quarter, while part 2 was sent out during week 8 and 9. The results of part 1 were then compared to part 2 of the survey to see if efficacy increased based on the student participants' already high, moderate, or low efficacy. This comparison was made using chi-square testing. Recruitment. A few days before this different quarters began, emails were sent to professors and instructors asking them if they'd be willing to administer the surveys in their classes. So the classes I chose were exclusively undergraduate, lower division classes to ensure that students from a wide variety of majors and years could participate, because climate change is not just for upper level STEM related classes, like it's an interdisciplinary problem that everyone should be aware of. So surveys were sent out to Environmental Science 3, Contemporary Issues in the Environmental Sciences, Public Policy 2, Politics and the Public Policy, and Geology 4, Natural Hazards and Disasters, to kind of cover different bases of climate change, so on the science side and the policy side. So the participants, I asked their college and year. As you can see, most of the respondents were from CHAS, but then there was a good mix of different years, except for year 5, because that's not as common on campus. And all participants were from Geology 4. So the survey itself. We asked 10 select and answer questions, and it ranged from I know the basics of climate change science to climate change is a serious issue, and also I want to join an organization, school affiliated or otherwise, that discusses climate change, and my future job or career will be related to climate change. And these questions were asked just to see how people felt before and then after the class. And similar to the other presentation, I asked on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 3 being neutral, and then 5 being strongly agree with the statements. Here are the answers to the select and answer portion. And as you can see, on question 1, 1 person would answer strongly disagree, while on part 2, 0 people answered that. And one thing is that the response rate was only 6%. So 25 students out of 420 students surveyed actually responded to the before and after, because that was the most important part, is that it was the same students doing the before survey and the after to gauge them specifically. There was also a free response part to the survey, and the questions asked were what causes climate change and which gas emissions do we need to reduce to prevent global warming. So these ones that students were able to fill in the blanks however they saw fit. So here are the answers. And what I did is I collapsed the different categories. So for example, if someone said, oh, driving cars, that would go under humans because that is like human activities causing climate change. Some people said it was natural, like a cycle plus factories releasing emissions, so that went under natural plus humans. And then I had one person originally say population growth. And then the same for question 12. Some people just put methane, some people just put carbon dioxide, and there were a few that put greenhouse gases more generally. Then on part 2, I asked a final select and answer question. And I asked, do you believe that you were able to give better, more detailed, better informed responses to the questions above because you took a class that had a lesson on climate change? So this was just to say like what they specifically thought, if they were able to give better answers or not. And 20 said yes, and 5 said no. So that was a pretty important finding. So after I collected all of this data, I ran chi-square calculations. And this is an example on the left side. I added a value of 1 to every cell because they can't be run with a 0 in the cell. So it was the total of 30. And then on the right, I had one statistically significant result for question 1. And then there were 3 very important ones for question 4, 8, and 10 that weren't quite statistically significant, but they were noteworthy. So the results. So question 1 was statistically significant at 14.2978. So this shows that students felt more confident about their knowledge of climate change after taking GO4. Their answers and therefore their efficacy seem to improve. And now we can have a conversation about making classes like Geology 4 required for students if it shows that it's helping them learn more. So question 4, 8, and 10 were not statistically significant, but were in a brief discussion. So based on the answers to question 4, students seem to recognize that climate change is here and is no longer a distant problem, which is important because I feel like in the past 20 years, there's definitely been a shift of like, oh, that's not our problem right now, versus students now say like, yes, it is a problem, it is here. Based on the answers to question 8, students seem eager to learn more about climate change. This is important because now it's up to UCR to feed that interest. So now that students want to learn, it's almost like, what do we do now that we have that interest in mind? And then based on the answers to question 10, students seem to recognize the need to go into fields related to climate change to tackle its consequences, which again, in the past 20 years, I feel like people weren't really thinking, oh, I need to do this as part of my career, versus now they recognize that need. So I had 3 possibilities for why there were statistically insignificant results. So one of them could be that student participants' initial knowledge was already high, which means that there wouldn't have been much of a difference between part 1 and 2. However, based on question 13 on part 2 of the survey, students said that they were able to answer the questions better, more thoroughly because of taking the class. So that doesn't seem as likely. Another possibility is that the questions in the survey may not have been specific enough about the causes and consequences. So I feel like the free response could have been longer. I tried keeping it short to have more respondents, but that's okay. And most likely the results were statistically insignificant because of how small the sample size was. So the response rate was only 6%. So having more students could have helped establish more meaningful results. So discussion. So what this research means. So based on question 1, student participants learned more about the basics of climate change science after taking a class. So this acts as an indication that the curriculum works and it can be expanded. Education is important in the face of climate change. So these findings show that UCR students are prepared to learn more and take on its consequences. So similar to the other presentation as well, data was collected during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, which inhibited the number of responses received from student participants. So I couldn't go to the classes and ask students to fill out the form like in person to ensure a high response rate. Furthermore, all of the data came from one class, Geology 4, and the majority of the students that responded were from TRAS. So this means that there's little internal validity for the UCR campus and very little external validity for other UC campuses. Conclusion. So we've come a long way. The climate change curriculum and students' climate change efficacy has improved, but there's still much work to do. Students should implore UCR to focus on standardizing the climate change curriculum for all students. And the more knowledgeable students are about climate change, the more likely it is that information will spread. because once we all graduate, we're taking that knowledge with us into the different fields we go into or different jobs. So future research. If another student were to conduct this research again, they would definitely need a larger sample size and more diversity in colleges and classes to help with internal validity. UCR needs to ensure that students from all backgrounds are being exposed to different aspects of climate change, whether it is the pure science of it or its policy implications. And finally, UCR students, they're not identical to students from UC Davis, UC Irvine, or UC Santa Barbara, or any of the other UC campuses. So it's important to gauge students' efficacy on these campuses as well, to see how well the entire UC system is doing, and to see if we can standardize the climate change curriculum to boost everyone's efficacy. Thank you.